Phil, what's up, man?
Oh, yeah. There he is.
Yeah, man, I like to just jump right into
Yes.
Hangry and Horny. So what I do is I just like go, what's up, everybody? Like, hey. So welcome to the show.
Yeah,
We're in Evergreen, Colorado, man. This is a beautiful place.
Yeah, thanks for coming up the hill, so to speak.
Yeah, it's really awesome to be actually unplugged. So first of all, like, who are you, Phil White?
Who am I? Oh, that's very existential. So yeah, quite a lot of listeners probably wouldn't have heard of me, but probably have heard of some of my co-authors. So I have 2 books with Kelly Starrett coming out this year. So Waterman 2.0 and then Flight Plan. And then Kelly, being the great connector, put me in touch with Brian McKenzie some years ago. And so he and I and Andy Galpin were batting around the idea of doing a book together for probably about a year, and then came up with the topic of fitness technology, which led to Unplugged. And then Kelly also put me in touch with Fergus Connolly, who at the time was Jim Harbaugh's performance director at the 49ers. And literally I just got a text from Kelly one day saying, hey, went to lunch with my mates at the 49ers. One of them wants to write a book, told him you could help. Cool. And I was like, okay. So yeah, within 2 weeks we'd agreed to write that book, Game Changer, Fergus and I. And then, also put me in touch with Chris Frankel, who's the director of performance at TRX, and so do some writing for those good folks. And so really just on this kind of big co-authoring binge the last few years.
Yeah,
and
super prolific, man. Like a ton of books with like a lot of notable figures in that world.
Yeah, and so really just trying to have that servant mentality, in the way that I can serve these people who have all these great ideas, is to take what's in their head and help them get it out to the masses to change lives by putting it on the page. And so really just enjoy that interviewing process, and then supplementing that with research, and then obviously the writing as well. So
that's cool. So I mean, a lot of these guys, it's mostly men, no gals so far in terms of like co-authoring.
Right.
Okay, so these guys are like super busy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this message wouldn't get out unless there's someone like you that can be able to distill this.
Yeah, and a lot of them are really great at teaching it. You know, obviously Brian was CrossFit Endurance for a long time now, Power Speed Endurance, and Kelly obviously was a one-man show in Mobility World before Danny Matta and Rob Wilson and Travis Stewart came on board. And so they're great. They all have this commonality, as well as having a passion of serving others and of trying to help fix people and improve lives, of being great teachers. And so they can talk it very well. And some of them are actually pretty decent writers as well. But as you said, it's really just that time component. So yeah, just from a storytelling standpoint, it's a lot easier and more efficient for us to spend a few hours a week on the phone, and me to scribble and words to come out the other end, and then just have to clean it up a little bit or add to it a bit, versus having to sit down and come up with 90,000 words can be a little daunting for a lot of people.
Absolutely. So for the audience that's listening, this is all in the context of like sports, health, wellness, right? So what was your background? Like, how did you get into this world? And then like, how did you become an author?
Sure. So in college it's kind of a contradiction, as we talked about earlier. So an Englishman who is an English major at a small American college that no one would have heard of in Kansas City, Mid-American Nazarene University, and everyone's going to think, where is that? So,
Christian on top of it.
Yeah, just this little suburb, in Kansas City. And so I came over from England and played basketball and my kind of football there, soccer. And as I said, was an English major. And so after college, really had this dual track where I got a call one day from my buddy Luke Kreisel, who's a great magazine writer, and I would argue one of the best magazine writers of our generation in New York. And he said, hey bud, you know that book I'm writing? And I said, yeah, okay. And he said, well, my dad's been sick, and so this is a guy I grew up with in England, and he had been going back home a lot. His dad had stomach cancer at the time, and was just having to spend a lot of time doing that. And then he was running 2 magazines at the time, and obviously deadlines don't stop. And so he said, well, we've got to have 80,000 words in 3.5 months, and I've got about 800 words.
Wow.
And so could you help me finish this thing? And by finish it, he means pretty much write it. And so he helped me a lot with the interviewing. And so what this was Jam Master Jay from Run DMC back in the day got together with a friend called Rob Principi, and they founded the Scratch DJ Academy in New York. And Rob thought, as well as doing like a little how-to guide, he wanted to do something bigger and better than that. So there was a how-to component, but also really just to tell the history and culture story of DJing, and 2 tracks, so hip-hop and electronic. And so Moby ended up doing the forward, and
really?
We interviewed everyone from Paul Oakenfold to Grandmaster Flash.
In person?
Luke did some of the interviews in person in New York. Most of mine were on the phone.
Okay.
And so, ended up writing 80,000 plus words in 3.5 months and kind of proving that I could do this. And then from there...
so you got, you learned by trial by fire.
Yeah, trial by fire.
Yeah.
And, never written anything more than probably a 3,000 or 4,000 word magazine piece. And then, so from... Snoop Dogg did a blurb for the back of the book, and so from Snoop Dogg, where logical to go next but to Winston Churchill. And so there's this crazy little slice of history where Churchill ended up in this small town in Missouri called Fulton in 1946, and really just called out communist Russia and what Stalin was really up to. And Churchill called it the most important speech of his career, and a lot of people don't know it was given in this tiny little town at this little college called Westminster College.
Wow.
And so a friend and I had been down in the museum, and he was like, man, this story is really fascinating. I wish somebody would tell it from the college's perspective, and specifically the college president who had this crazy idea, for our lecture series. Why not try to get the most famous guy in the world? Winston Churchill managed to pull it off. And so I ended up telling that story. And so, as I said, kind of a crazy jump from DJing to Churchill. And then Harry Truman was kind of influential at bringing Churchill to this small town in Missouri. And then I kind of geeked out on Truman for a while and read David McCullough's big doorstop book just called Truman, and was really fascinated by how Truman survived this double split in the Democratic Party in 1948 and this supposed Republican dream ticket, and so much so that the pollsters actually stopped polling in September of that year, full 2 months before the election, because they thought he was cooked. Yeah, and somehow he managed to win, and so he made these 352 stops around the country. It just kind of went on the rails for a long time. And
big campaign.
Yeah, 30,000 miles of rail travel,
really?
And managed to just get out and meet the people and turn it around.
Yeah, in the flesh. Wow.
And so these 3 books really, as you said, Trial by Fire, proved to myself I could do it, really helped me hone some best practices on the research side. And at the same time, being a 2-sport college athlete, I was writing for Canoe and Kayak and Sup the Mag. And I had jacked up my back deadlifting, and I thought, well, I don't want to, our insurance plan was crappy, and I'm figuring the surgery route's going to be expensive. I don't want to get hooked on opioids, and so what can I do? And so I stumbled across Kelly Starrett's work online and reached out to Kelly and said, hey, your work has really helped me these last couple of months fix my back, and it just completely cleared it up with just those grainy parking lot of dreams, as he calls it, at San Francisco CrossFit. A lot different
like
than,
this
than it is now.
recording.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but just amazingly helpful. And I didn't know at the time that his background was he was a river rat. He was on the Whitewater national team paddling down in Durango.
You had this background when you went to college?
Kelly had this background.
No, I know, but did you have it? That's why I connected?
So for Sup the Mag, I pitched my editor a story on Kelly Starrett, and my editor didn't know who it was and didn't know anything about my ability, but he said, sure, you can do that.
Okay.
So just from one conversation with Kelly, we thought he was getting ready to write Ready to Run, his great book with TJ Murphy, who's a friend and an incredible writer, and we thought, well, why not do a similar book for paddlers, surfers, and rowers? And so it took a few years to gestate, but Waterman 2.0 should hopefully be out this summer. We're kind of in the final design stages, and so really, saying if you're going to be on the water, these are some of the positions you should be able to hit, and if you can't, here are some things to do, and then also some lifestyle stuff around sleep and hydration and nutrition as well. And so really anyone that's into water sports should probably pick it up. And then from there, Kelly just introduced me to this amazing network, Fergus Conley, Brian McKenzie, Andy Galpin, and Chris Frankel again at TRX, and really everything just flowed out of Kelly's willingness to be selfless and just connect.
That's awesome.
And so pretty amazing how your whole life can pivot in one conversation, one interview.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about on our hike up to here. Just the sort of randomness. There aren't really any coincidences. So let's just give a summary. Like, what was the name of the first book that you wrote?
Yeah.
Or let's give like all your books to this
man,
point.
that's self-promotion.
Because I just think that people would
interesting
love to like
things to
go
dig up.
back, because you have mainly recently all this sporting
Sure.
type of genre, but
Yeah.
this thing about like the rappers and
Yeah.
electronic music, and then
Mhm.
Churchill and Truman is
Right.
like really fascinating, because I'm a now understanding like the importance of history, and so I'd love to read like those books too.
Yeah. Oh, hate talking about myself though. We're here in the forest. We should be talking about birds and rivers and
I know.
stuff.
We'll get there, man. We'll get there.
Yeah. So the DJing book is called On the Record, and then the Churchill book is called Our Supreme Task. And then the Truman book about the Whistle Stop tour is not very imaginatively titled Whistle Stop. And then Waterman 2.0, as I said, was the first one kind of in this realm of human performance, but the most recent one to come out. And then, from there, obviously, Unplugged and Game Changer both came out last year. And then this one I got here, it's like shameless plug, the 17-hour fast with Dr. Frank Merritt, who I met through Brian McKenzie. That just came out this week. We ended up self-publishing that on Amazon for various reasons. But yeah, Frank is a trauma room physician down in Florida, and is also board certified in internal medicine. And so Brian just became fascinated. Frank says, well, the liver is made for glucogenesis and also for ketogenesis. Mm-hmm. And so really just talking about, we feel like the fasting movement a little bit got co-opted by people who, some people have good intentions, and others I think are partly trying to sell a line of supplements or have an agenda. And so for me to partner with someone like Dr. Frank, who is legitimately a practicing ER physician, and as I said, has that board certification in internal medicine. So he has the legitimate scientific background. And then once I heard the story of why he founded his company on the side and what he's trying to do. So his best friend Jason was diagnosed with the most aggressive form of brain cancer some years ago and given maximum of 6 months to live. And Frank got together with Jason's wife, and then with a multidisciplinary team from the hospital, endocrinologists and basically every ologist that you can think of in the medical community, and said, okay, well, we can't let this stand. We got to help our friend. How can we do this? And so they came up with a series of protocols, and one of them was fasting. And they managed to help Jason not just outlive that diagnosis, but he lived 7 years and was able to have 2 kids with his wife and practiced law almost until the end. And eventually the cancer came back hard and took his life. But before
he had he was given 6 months to live.
Yeah, and managed to live 7 years.
7.
Yeah, and managed to have Vitality, which is why Frank's company is called Vitality Pro. And so before he passed, they were out on the porch one day and in the rocking chairs, and Jason stopped rocking and he looked at Frank and said, Frank, you've got to promise me that what you've done to help me here isn't going to stop with me, that you're going to take this thing and use it to change lives and maybe even save lives. And so Frank kind of teared up and he said, you got to promise me, Frank. He said, looked at him right in the eye and he said, okay, I promise you, Jason, I'll do this. And so when I heard that kind of would have connected with anyone, I think, on a heart level. But then my wife's father, John, passed from the same kind of brain cancer a year and a half before we met.
Yeah, because usually brain cancer it's aggressive.
Yeah, exactly. And we think that maybe if Nicole and her family had known what we know now through Frank and through doing this book, the 17-hour fast, that we would have maybe been able to help her dad make some lifestyle changes and possibly prevent him from even getting cancer in the first place. And so really we just feel, whether it's cancer or someone's kind of knocking on the door of CVD or diabetes, this can really help people. Or even just in everyday life, we have this abundance, and it causes some problems, like all these thousands of years of evolutionary biology, and then only 1 or 2% of it has been 24-hour drive-through lines and 24-hour Walmarts and all this kind of thing. And so the fact that we can have food at any time, with our brains need to forage and tendency to, if you came across a big kill or whatever, you would just feast up and where your next meal was coming from. The combination of those things is not good. And so a lot of the world is chasing a calorie, as Frank says, and in America we've got excess calories, and in the West in general we're dying of diseases of choice. Right. And so again, if we're able to distill this fasting down to a minimum effective dose, and then for people who are overweight on the front and back end, taper down the pre and post meals, both in terms of portion size, up the good fats, up the protein a little bit, decrease the carbs, and make sure that it's fruit and veggies and maybe a few whole grains, that it doesn't have to be this radical where you have to fast every day. It doesn't have to be this start with 18 hours, 24, 36, 72, because I think a lot of people look at it as like a training regimen. Well, if I squatted 200 pounds today, I better be able to squat 210 by next week. And the same methodology with fasting. And I think that can go wildly out of control. And you don't have to be radical to be able to just become a bit more resilient, retrain your liver and your pancreas a little bit, and just make yourself healthier. And so really to me, the motivation behind this book is pure. And Frank, like the other co-authors, his dedication is to fulfill that promise, to Jason, to help change lives. And so when my wife and I heard this, we were like, well, how could we not be on board with this book?
Yeah, it's cool, especially this time in America and in the Western nations. It's like you have that overabundance and people are dying from having an excess available to them, where in the past, like you said, that we didn't always have the knowingness when our next meal was going to come. So it's built in to evolution to have a fast, whether you liked it or not, Right. And so now we have the opportunity to like tune back into that evolutionary genetics. And is that what you think may be correlated to a lot of these diseases that are coming up?
Yeah, I think so, because obviously understand with all these books that I learned by osmosis, and it's kind of a master and apprentice thing with all these co-authors, but I don't have any formal medical school background, but Frank does, and so knowing what he knows, and then knowing what the research that Vitality Pro has done the last few years, that's certainly, I think what he believes is that that again, a lot of these diseases that we're suffering from and the biggest killers, in the West and in this country, all related to excesses in our lifestyle. And so if we're able to recalibrate a little bit, because sure, there are times of feasting, if you look at any spiritual tradition, you'll see that, but then again, also every spiritual tradition seems to have some kind of fasting. And if you look at cultures around the world, and I haven't traveled to as many countries and continents as you have, but you've likely seen that all over the world.
Well, it's funny, you're very psychic right now, because that was what I was thinking about in some of these holy works that I've read, that they have this tradition of like fasting and feasting, and a lot of it is not really sure entirely like how they came to this, because these are a lot of like ancient cultures and like ancient wisdom. And now like modern culture is like catching up to it and saying like, hey, maybe these people knew something even though they couldn't prove it. So you're leading on to that, like these other cultures or traditions have this built in.
Right, and kind of that I think also our culture is very arrhythmic, and technology is somewhat accelerating that arrhythmia. And so I think that in those ancient cultures, somewhat that it was and again, I'm not an anthropologist, so I wouldn't be able to speak as an authority really, but just I get the sense that there's this discipline and this rhythm built in. So obviously, with your martial arts background, well, that is a daily practice, or even what Pavel says in Simple and Sinister, about the kettlebell training can be a daily practice. Anyone can have a daily physical practice, or obviously yoga would be another.
Right.
Mobility would be one. Breath work would be another.
Yeah.
And so we have these things. And then in spiritual traditions, there's obviously prayer and study of a sacred text and the discipline of silence and solitude. And then also, as we just mentioned, this commonality amongst seemingly all religions and faith disciplines of another one being fasting. And so it is interesting, isn't it? It's kind of what Brian McKenzie says about making old medicine new.
Right.
So
they're all leading to becoming like a better human being, accessing vitality.
Yes.
And a lot of it was like some of the religious texts I read is that like if you eat too much, you're gonna lose your life force. So we all felt that when we feasted on Thanksgiving. We have a food coma. well, every time we do that every single day, I think that cumulative effect would lead to an excess of body fat, all kinds of like symptoms that are not healthy, you know. And so these things were pointed out in this like old medicine that's now becoming new.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think even certain processes, you know, autophagy, so sloughing off dead cells or using partly decomposing cells to create new cell matter and regeneration, both in body and brain. You know, you start to see that some of that kind of thing is almost, if not completely switched off, then diminished if you're constantly in a fed state. And so obviously you can take this thing to the nth degree. You know, you can be monitoring your blood sugar every 15 minutes to make sure you're still in ketosis, and I certainly would never take away from the people that are, you know, just gung-ho about always being in ketosis. But Frank's thing is like, look, for most people that isn't practical. And also
stressful too.
And it's stressful. And also, if you try to go into a gym and follow, you know, pick an elite athlete, LeBron James's workout, and you're sedentary, you're just going to be demolished. And you're going to think, well, this is why I hated working out and why I stopped 15 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And so there's an adherence component to it as well, where you know, we see kind of the 17-hour fast as an on-ramp for people, where we say, okay, just try this once a week. The first couple of times it may be unpleasant, but here are some lifestyle things to go along with it to make it less so. So we advise people maybe in the evening at least to do a tech fast along with that.
Cool.
And as well as to spend some me time, to also spend quality time with friends and family, and to really kind of make this a more intentional time, to slow down a little bit, you know, and some accompanying practices that hopefully make it a bit less unpleasant for those first few weeks, so that people feel the benefits, whereas, you know, the hunger pangs or the expected, you know, because there's this fear of it, or this skepticism, where even I thought, well, goodness, you know, I mean, look at me, I'm at 187, 188 on a good day with my pocket full of rocks, and so I thought, well, you know, am I going to struggle to keep weight on, or am I going to start dropping weight or whatever? And so I had all these objections from a performance standpoint. If I don't get my banana and my handful of almonds 30 to 45 minutes before I work out, you know, I'm going to bonk if I'm out paddling for a couple of hours or whatever. And a lot of these things are just artificial constructs and fallacies, but perception is reality, and there is no separation between body and brain. And so if we perceive these things, and even in the endurance community, you know, coaches tell you, oh, you need a goo or a gel every 20 or 30 minutes of a race, or you're going to bonk, or, you know, all these different things. And it's like, well, I think the liver is capable of fueling us just for a little bit further than that, you know, or longer than that 20 or 30 minutes. But even within the, in quotes, performance community, we see these fallacies, and we see, you know, in the wider population, just this obsession with snacking constantly and being in this fed state. And so then you start to look at, like we talk about, autophagy being diminished and some of these other beneficial processes that the body starts to forget when it's never encountering any kind of scarcity.
Yeah, which is crazy, because I remember like back in like the 90s and like 2000s, the whole thing was like, if you want to lose weight, and it was like very counterintuitive, was to snack throughout the day, to be a grazer, you know. And it's like the whole bodybuilding community got into that, because it was like you're in constant state of anabolism, you know, in terms of anabolic hormones. But it was also counterintuitive to actually fast, and that would actually increase muscle. And this is like what's really neat about the research, that it's now being studied by all these institutions, and saying like, hey, no, like there's a sort of like a balance point with this, where you want to be in an anabolic state, but there's time to be in a catabolic state. And that's the reason why that we have these certain hormones built in, and there's like a circadian rhythm to it, talking about Unplugged and being in nature, you know. And then what I really love about what you guys are doing is that a lot of people, when they hear information, they get so like inspired and motivated, and they try to, like, you know, eat the whole damn cow in one bite, right, so to speak. So when they go on a workout program, they'll try to do that LeBron James like workout like their first day, and just completely be sore for like a week, barely walk, you know, can't get out of bed, and they're like, this doesn't work, you know. Whereas you guys are like, hey, don't change much about your lifestyle, just implement this tiny little step, and then do that consistently, as with any discipline practice that you just mentioned earlier. you know, and then you can see the sort of transformation that happens, and if you're just patient enough to just do a little bit at a time, and then as you grow you could take on more. That capacity to do more is increased, you know, versus trying to like conquer Rome in one day, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think even just selfishly, it just doing the fast a couple of times a week has made me so much more resilient, and made me realize how unresilient I was.
Right.
And so there was one day recently where I was on the phone with a co-author, and we were meant to go until a certain time, and he had something come up where he said, hey, can we go to that time, and then because this thing came up tomorrow, I'm going to have to cram in tomorrow's time this afternoon, if that's okay. And so I ended up going until 3:45, 3:50 in the afternoon, and I hadn't been planning to fast. And sure, I mean, some people may technically say it wasn't a true fast because I'd had my coffee in the morning and was still kind of sipping it at that point, but you know, so it wasn't a complete water fast, but at the end of the day I hadn't had any food, and I was able to go to that point. And a couple of years ago I would have been in all kinds of trouble with that. Cognitively I would have slowed down and everything else, but then we read about Jimmy Moore, I think it is, that talks about the ketone clarity, and I felt like I was able to focus. And so, yeah, other than him saying, I'll call you back in 5 minutes, I just need to go refill the coffee, once he got his coffee and I was decaffeinated, we were able to keep going for another couple of hours. And so even, Andy Galpin, the co-author on Unplugged, talks about this a lot. Like we keep thinking we need to live every day optimally.
Yes, that's
right.
We talked about it.
But even with On It, with Aubrey and Carl Kingsbury, who's becoming a good friend, and getting to know him the last couple of years, and really just that On It's thing is total human optimization. But I know that they would say as well, and Aubrey says in his recent book, which everyone should pick up, because it's excellent, that you can try to optimize, but life isn't optimal. And so sometimes if you have, say, a newborn in the house, well, guess what? Your sleep is not going to be optimal for 6 to 9 months. That's just reality. I have 2 boys, 8 and 10, like a baby, remember that. And so that, that sleep isn't going to be optimal. Well, if you have a stressful job, or a job that involves deadlines in any way, well, guess what? You're going to have some work stress, okay? Well, relationships undulate, and Kenny Kane, Andy's co-host on the Body of Knowledge podcast, talks about this undulation and contextual programming, and how physical programming needs to account for the growth and decay curve of life, because it's not just linear. Like, you can't just say, okay, you want to get to this goal, we're going to go on this straight line, here's this physical stimulus which is going to yield an adaptation, and we're just going to keep marching along, because things get in the way. I've got to take a red eye to Philly on Wednesday for work, or I've got to go here and do an interview unexpectedly because someone who wasn't going to be available is now available. All these different things in life. Your kid has a problem.
You can't get your supplements in.
Yeah.
You can't biohack. You can't go out in nature and ground. You can't do
exactly.
But maybe you can do some breathing.
Yeah, well, you can. Then you start to get into the realm of portable practices. With the breath work, with the mobility that we could. Like, oh man, freaking hips are tight from those kettlebell swings yesterday. Well, sure, we could both put our feet up on the table and do what Kelly would do, and get into some external rotation. And so those portable practices are very useful. But again, with the fasting, even though it may not be a full fast, like say I had grabbed an apple mid-morning, well, it doesn't matter that wouldn't have been a full fast. But the point being, on that particular day, I had a situation that was suboptimal in terms of nutrition. Okay, and I'd worked out hard and fairly late the evening before. I'm not a morning guy, as you know. I'm an evening guy, and so so my body, somebody would say, as you said, well, you needed protein in 20 grams within 20 minutes, or 30 within 30, and then you got to do this every couple hours. And so my body was still in that state where it was trying to recover from that kettlebell workout the night before. But I felt fine and I dealt with it. And it's not to say that I'm bulletproof or super resilient, but just you were just down with Scott Carney, and as he talks about in What Doesn't Kill Us, sometimes we need scarcity and circumstances that force us to be more resilient. So at those times when life throws us curveballs and is not optimal, which parentheses is most days in some way, shape or form, and sometimes it's everything can go to crap, you're able to get through and to not just survive that, but to thrive in that.
Yeah, exactly. So you're talking about the adaptation piece, that optimal adaptation balance that Andy Galpin talks about, right? So life is life, and shit's gonna happen. Just like you said, deadline's gonna come up, or some author or somebody you're talking to has to extend the meeting because there's something else that's coming up the next day that you guys are supposed to meet.
Yeah.
So you figure out a way to like accept that situation, because a lot of people are like, I guess they have a certain goal, let's say a bodybuilder or something, which they're not usually very healthy in the first place, you know, but they want to gain a certain amount of muscle, and their thought is, if I go a few hours without eating, I'm gonna eat away all my work, all the muscle, all the protein that I'm eating. And but it's actually something that if they just accept that, and it's part of life, that in the long run they're gonna be more resilient. Their body's gonna adapt to get to that outcome.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously there is value in routine, you know, and we see this particularly in kids with special needs, you know, that routine, like anyone on the autism spectrum, if that routine gets thrown off, you know, and, you know, obviously you and I have our practices, you know, the hot and cold, and, you know, whether it's the kettlebell work or some kind of daily physical practice. And I sure like my mobility work, as well as my wife can attest, all the torture equipment that her and the kids keep tripping over, you know, from mobility WOD. But so yeah, sure, we like our routines, and there's comfort to be found in routine. And also we can, you know, Steve Magnus and Brad Stulberg, you know, their excellent book, Peak Performance, they talk about the value in routine, and so you can kind of alleviate some of that stress. Or even Fergus Conley, you know, talks about on game day and the day before, particularly, you know, athletes keeping that routine the same,
priming,
even
right?
down to the meals. So subconsciously it leaves you more of what the old Russian scientists in the 50s and 60s call that kind of overall functional reserve, so that you can deal with the chaos of game day and the situations that present themselves in that chaotic system of a game of any kind. And so the same in life, you know, if you're preparing for a big presentation at work or whatever, it helps to have that routine. But at the same time, you know, as Andy's spoken to, you know, I mentioned a bit in your conversation, there are those days where it isn't possible. So now what? You know, or even going back to Unplugged. So, you know, with obviously Colorado, there's a lot of triathletes here and some pretty hardcore athletes. Well, what if your power meter on your bike goes out right before a training ride? Does that mean you should just pack up and go home? Well, no, you should be self-aware and self-calibrated enough to know roughly what your rate of perceived exertion should be. You know, the same reason that I didn't replace the monitor batteries in my Concept 2 row machine when they went out. Because I know if I'm meant to be doing 500-meter intervals, or, you know, 1 minute on, 1 minute off, well, I know roughly what my stroke rate is. I know roughly what that's meant to feel like, and what I meant to feel at the end. And then when I have recalibrated that, you can use the tech as a check-in point. I'm pretty close. And Andy actually did an experiment where they had athletes come in to the lab at Cal State Fullerton and run, you know, a certain distance, and then they had them come back in with no technology, not even a wristwatch, and said, okay, just recreate that. And the only guidance they gave them was, okay, remember that run you did the other day, make it feel the same. And they were all plus minus, I think, 5 seconds or less.
Wow.
Well, that shows us this body that we've been given is an amazing self-calibration machine.
Right.
And so we don't, you know, if your tech fails, well, guess what? That isn't the end of the world. You know, if you're not able to get that nutrition in, you know, even after your workout, you're not able to get your 20 grams of complete protein within 20 minutes, your 30 within 30, and then eat every 2 hours, well, you're going to be okay. Like, you're going to be all right, you know. Or even sleep books recently, like Matthew Walker and Chris Winter both have excellent sleep books that I binge read back to back. And Chris Winter talks about the pro teams he works with, and the message there is like, okay, so it stinks that you have to go and fly across the country and you know, have this back-to-back game. But don't set yourself up for failure like, oh, these are the games we're going to lose. You know, even on ESPN, I saw some story recently toward the end of the NBA regular season, like, oh, well, you know, based on, you know, disrupted sleep and this kind of thing, these are the games that the teams battling for playoff spots are probably going to lose. Well, that can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you're one of the star players on that and you read that and think, oh, yeah, we are going to move, you know, we got Minnesota tomorrow night, we're going to lose that because we're jet-lagged. Well, guess what? you're probably going to go out and not play very well. So again, the mind-body connection is pretty powerful.
It is pretty powerful.
We just got to think about that and realize that, okay, suboptimal doesn't mean absolute collapse or failure.
Right. So there's two things that came up for me. So there's the feeling intuition side that is very evolutionary. So with all this tech, we sort of replaced that, like understanding like how we're feeling both physiologically and psychologically, right? And two, a lot of people who are optimizing, if they fail like on sleep or supplements, they'll just like throw in the hat and give up completely on a program. And one of the things I noticed with a lot of like successful people is that they get it done whether they have a bad day or not, you know, like they will in the long run just keep going, you know. And so that's the only difference is a lot of people quit because they're like, oh, you know, I didn't complete this task for the day, so I'm just gonna give up completely, versus just like, hey, I fell off the fucking wagon, you know, now let's just get back on. I fell over like a kid does when they're learning to walk. Let's just get up and try again. You know, and then there's the intuition side, which, you know, it's in alignment with that Andy Galpin experiment, where if you really are in tune, because like how the hell did we get around without GPS, right? Like how did we know the timing to call someone when we didn't have voicemail, right? It was just like when you're in sync with life, and when you get unplugged, you know, tech is amazing. Actually, like, it's great for leveraging and being able to give us the time constraints to do a lot of the things. That's why we have all this abundance of time, and we're wasting it like binge watching shit, binge eating things, you know, because we're kind of bored. But if we tune back into like these things of, you know, tuning back to ourselves, like we kind of get in sync with things. And like with you and I meeting up, right? I was like threw it out there like, hey man, I'm in Denver. I would love to like interview you, and it just so happened to like line up. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and obviously partly through you staying with Scott Carney, who's a good friend and just a great connector again, and just just these amazing people that you encounter. But even just making space. So you go back to the fasting, but one of the things that Frank talks about is how we're crowding out, you know, moments of joy and appreciation in our lives. And so, you know, part of, again, using the fasting part as kind of an on-ramp just to help people kind of take stock of themselves and reorient a little bit. And so, you know, so I'm chronically late, I'll confess to you. You know, I would say it's because of my dad, and he would say it's because of his dad, and, you know, we'd have this long line of lateness in our family. And so that just means that I need to leave dramatically early to be on time. So I rolled up, you know, right at 9 o'clock, which was very surprising. My wife would have said, well, you never do that for me, what are you doing, right? But it would have been 8:50, but I met a friend, Dave. He and his wife have two kids at the same school, and he was fishing in the lake. And of all things, you know, people might roll their eyes at this as being hipster and being so Colorado, but he's actually, he was going to start a food truck, but then started looking into, well, would he be able to scale it over time, decided he's just going to sell some artisanal scones and other stuff online, and he just has enough demand from friends and family who like his baking creations to do this. And he said, man, I tell you what, I don't know how this thing's going to play out the next few years. You know, he's launching the website in a couple of weeks, but he said, I'm never going back to corporate America, you know. And so just one, that's a really cool sentiment, but two, the fact that I left a little bit early because of my chronic lateness, because I didn't want to disrespect you and your time, and I knew that if I, you know, left with only a couple of minutes to spare, well, there's the chance I could run into someone. So just creating a few more gaps, because I think that sometimes you listen to certain podcasts and you read certain books, and they're all about, you need to do this one more thing because it's going to change your life, or maybe these top 10 thing, you know, listicle type things, you know, or, you know, life hacker type things. What it becomes is almost this Henry Ford efficiency model to life, where the assembly line has to keep churning, and if you waste 2 seconds, you know, that it's, you know, something you could be doing in that time that's productive. Yeah, become
like a machine, basically.
Yeah, and that's a great way to run an assembly line. It transformed manufacturing, but it is not a great way to run a life. And
so scale, man.
Yeah, and so to me, it's becoming, you know, the last couple of years, not where can I jam more in, but where can I start to create more spaces so I can cut out, you know, like this afternoon, probably pick the kids up from school and take them to play some tennis or basketball, kick a ball around. where can I carve out that time at least 2 days a week and commit to that? Where can I find time, to reconnect with a friend for an hour-long conversation, or like us with this, rather than just these fragmented bursts of communication by text or by Facebook Messenger. And it's not those things are bad. I mean, you sent me a Facebook message, I sent one back, we went back and forth.
Yeah, that's where technology works for us.
And so the technology is neutral, it's how we wield it. But again, you find the Instagram is a great time filler, right?
Right.
You're waiting in line at the airport. Well, I've got to fill every minute with either fidget spinning or fidgeting by spinning with my thumbs on the phone. Like literally anywhere. In line behind you, there's 3 people and 2 of them are on their phone.
Yeah.
And so what you start to try to consider what kind of effect, is it positive or negative, that we're trying to fill our heads and our minds and our lives with activity every second of the day. And again, it goes back to arrhythmia versus rhythm, and just trying to find that rhythm. And what are some of the ways that we can start to put in more time to just pause and to appreciate and to take, pay attention to what's going on around us, pay attention to people truly in conversation.
Right.
Rather
your family,
than,
your friends. You're talking about like putting in joy from Dr. Frank, you know, like getting that aspect of life that's getting like squeezed out. Everybody's wondering why they're depressed, anxious, and it's just awesome that we're realizing this, because I think that most of us never realize these things until it's like almost too late, or we're at the other end of the spectrum, and so we have to swing it back a little bit. But I'm certainly guilty. Like, I'm hiking up in like Colorado, but I'm like wanting to share this view to my friends, which is awesome. But I was hiking with 2 other friends, like Scott Carney and Michael Castro Giovanni, right? And they're like up ahead, and I'm like slipping on like mud because it's just rain, it's clay, and I'm like filming this. But a part of me felt like I was not engaged with them, And so it's trying to find that balance, right? Because I could just take a couple of shots and then sink in back with them, instead of like pulling my phone out like every moment, and trying to like record this.
And again, it's balance. It's not saying you have to become a Luddite, you have to put on sackcloth and ashes, and you're only going to eat bread and water or whatever it might be. It's not or going
fun, man. No alcohol. No drugs.
No coffee. Like, what the heck is going on?
Good food.
I
can't eat spaghetti. Come on now.
It's not paleo, bro.
That's awesome. So, Dr. Frank, so you met him through Brian McKenzie?
Yeah.
And so, what has he found with this type of lifestyle of eating? So fasting for what's like the goal, or it's 17 hours, right? So like, how did he come up to that number?
And so really it was just reviewing the literature, over several years, and then, as I said, like getting with this multidisciplinary team at the hospital to try to save Jason's life, his friend, and then extend it, and just kind of, came down to best practices. So obviously it's pretty close in number to the 16-8, intermittent fasting.
Okay.
And so that's, that's a worthwhile thing to do. But, for us, it goes kind of beyond the fast even. And with tapering those pre and post meals, so getting the portions down to, maybe 75% the first time you do it, and then maybe 50%. And particularly for somebody that's chronically overweight or obese, to try to get into a new pattern of eating where they're not eating quite so much, and they're starting to change the macronutrient balance a little bit, so it's not so heavy on the processed carbs. And again, doing it gradually. But then, eventually maybe that pre and post meal calorie count and portion size starts to become the norm for them. So not only does doing that for everybody kind of extend the benefits of the fast or amplify them a little bit, but again, for that at-risk population, and we know the percentages on obesity in this country and in the West in general, well, for them, hopefully that smaller portion size with a better macronutrient balance can start to become the new normal for them. And then, as I said, obviously there is that kind of, it's the kind of gateway drug to then, okay, how am I living my life? I've been going hard and fast for all these years. Is that helping me? Or maybe in my career, but maybe what kind of negative effects is it having on my family life or my friendships? Or, so what are some of these other practices that we can start to put with this, whether it's breath work or whether it's, you know, hot and cold and this kind of thing, whether it's, again, relational things on the family and friend end, and maybe, again, combining an actual fast with a tech fast, you know, and try to couple the two together.
Yeah, so stacking.
Yeah, kind of stack, and see what happens there. And so, yeah, I mean, it's not, you know, kind of the radical cutting edge ketosis research that Dom D'Agostino and others are doing. And, you know, just interviewed Dom, and just super gracious. I mean, who gives you time when they've been on the road for several days on a Sunday afternoon? I'm sure he would rather be catching up with his wife than talking to me for this keto plus alcohol story for On It that I was doing at the time. But amazingly generous. And yeah, some of the research that Dom and those others are doing in this field is amazing. And so this isn't
you guys are,
that,
like,
it's
translating that.
It's trying to, you know,
like,
to
make it practical for
make
everyday
it
people.
for the masses, and make it so it's not a hardcore science book. And again, I'm not a researcher like Dom, you know, and I'm not, you know, board certified like Frank, and so it's just trying to be, for me, to be the conduit and to learn on the job with these guys, and then again find how I can spin it back to people on the page and then apply it to my own life as well, selfishly. See what I can take, because for me, I mean, you know, whether it's the breath work with Brian and, you know, all the stuff I've learned from Andy, and then with Fergus, you know, knowing that we need to not just develop physical qualities, but also tactical, psychological, and those are indivisible from the physical elements, you know, and really applying that and that load balancing even to my work. Whether it's the mobility with Kelly and making that a daily practice, whether it's, again, just this past couple of weeks going back to the Simple and Sinister program from Pavel, and, you know, Brett Jones and Craig Marker and Pavel will just continue to do great work with their practices. So really just to take from all these guys a little bit and to learn from all of them, to me, is a real blessing. And then to be able to, as you said, kind of be the channel to put that on the page, so hopefully it gets to the masses and the others are able to start, again, just taking a little bit here and there. You know, you've got fasting here, mobility here, breath work here, kettlebell work here, and then like you do, I mean, you're a seeker, and just what we talked about earlier today, some of the many practices that you've even uncovered recently and started to dive into. That seems like a similar
MMA
approach.
of life, you know. You're talking about Bruce Lee. I love that quote, you know. And what was it again?
About essentialism, and I'm going to butcher it, but something like, you know, keep what is useful, discard what is useless, and add what is uniquely your own. I think I probably stole that from Rob Wilson, but
so that's the thing, that, you know, life is like one big long experiment, you know. And so what we found with these people is we can, like, distill the best things and incorporate it into our lives, integrate it, and become it itself. You know, and what's really cool about you is I can tell that you're not just some writer or somebody that's, like, pushing out information to just sell it, but you actually, like, live the lifestyle. And this is, like, the same common denominator with a lot of the people that I interview, is that they're actually, like, living this stuff, right? So let's get into the what's the upsides of, like, fasting, and what would be, like, the potential, like, downsides, you know, because one of the things I notice is why I love eating fat so much is it makes me full, it satiates me, it keeps me not hungry for a longer period of time. Yet in this country, we've been conditioned to think that we need to eat low fat because of cholesterol being bad and all these things, where, like, cholesterol, the brain, nervous system, cell membranes are all made out of fat. And I think a lot of these conditions are coming up because people aren't eating enough fat, eating too much sugar, you know, having these, like, up and down roller coaster energy levels. And then obviously over time, like, the pancreas is shutting down, they're developing, like, more adipose tissue. So again, like, what's going on with the fasting, and like how that benefits people, and what would be the potential downsides?
Yeah, and I think you just touched on a big part of it. And then obviously another effect of that sugar glucose roller coaster is obviously eventually you become pre-diabetic and then diabetic. You know, at a certain point when that kind of axis between the liver and pancreas and the rest of that system starts to become misaligned, well, over time that dysfunction leads to disease. And so, and not only with diabetes, but with cardiovascular disease, with stroke, and with the you know, potentially the development and then the rampant cell overgrowth of cancer. And so obviously those are, you know, the lifestyle diseases that we've created this massive endemic problem in this country and in the West in general, for, you know, partly caused by the fact that we haven't caught up to these new ways of food storage. You know, even the refrigerator, if you look at it historically, is not that old, you know, the icebox, whatever you want to say, you know, right. And then ways of food distribution. So if you look at again, we were talking about history earlier, the highway system in the 50s, well, great for a lot of stuff, great for road tripping, right? Thank you, President Eisenhower. But not so much thank you in terms of it allowed fast food restaurants to spread more rampantly, and obviously for food to be delivered more, so then you combine that with refrigerated storage. Well,
I'm just going to interject here because that took a 17-hour trip from California to be here in Colorado, and it was just like so frustrating that like every gas station had like 99% of unedible food according to my standards, right? And it's so frustrating. It's like what I got to do. So it's one of those perfect times to actually fast, you know, and I had like some snacks like nuts to carry with me that were high fat.
Sure.
But again, it just goes back to that highway system, how all these little stops are designed, you know, for commercialism, you know?
Right, exactly. And then you get into, you know, 24-hour access to food, and the fact that you have these giant sub-zero fridges in houses, and, you know, and then massive walk-in pantries and everything. Right. And so, and then really, as we talked about a little bit, and again, I'm not an anthropologist, but, you know, we were conditioned over thousands and thousands of years to, well, if your hunt was unsuccessful, well, you're going to be fasting for a bit longer. Deal with it, you know, or, oh, maybe you'll come across some berries in the morning, or you'll pick a few of them and eat them, and then move on. But then when, you know, if there was a big enough kill, you're going to load up on that, because the brain fears scarcity to a certain degree and doesn't know when it's going to get its next meal. So you have all these old instincts, but then you have these new mechanisms of food access and abundance, and those two things do not jive, you know. And then you start to talk about, you know, from a behavioral standpoint, habit loops. Well, if it's a default habit, whether it's an endurance athlete who on the bike has all these goos and gels, you know, in these pouches, and every 20 minutes they do it, well, okay, well then if you just took that away from them on that 3-hour training ride, well, maybe they will bonk, maybe they will have problems, you know. And you know, just similarly, well, if your habit is when you're at home in the evening where you have dinner, and then 2 or 3 times before bed where you wander into the pantry and you get a few chips, and then you go to the fridge and you get some dip and this and some ice cream and this and that, and it becomes habitual, well, then you start to draw this line between, you know, mindset and thoughts and behaviors, and then habits forming out of hardened behaviors, and then you get stuck in these loops. And so you start, you know, you look at books like Charles Duhigg's The Power of Habit, and that kind of thing, and how hard habits are to break, and if you're going to, you know, you can't just get rid of it, you've got to replace it with something else, or what's that going to be? And so even just looking at the psychology of overconsumption of food, both in terms of portion size and the regularity of it, means that we're almost constantly in a fed state. So then, okay, well, now autophagy isn't working right, so you've got problems even down to the very cellular level. You know, now your liver and pancreas are going haywire because they don't know what's going on. You're constantly topping up with glucose, whether you're an athlete or not. And so your body starts to almost detrain the liver and pancreas, or at least the ketogenic pathways. Right. And so to the point where you almost become dependent on these frequent glucose top-offs. I mean, we've even had friends and family members, come out here in Colorado and do this hike, you know, that we did a little bit of, and like, hey, did you bring a granola bar with you in your backpack or something, you know, and start freaking out, and it's like, you had breakfast, you know, 45 minutes ago, like, what is going on? But they've just conditioned themselves that, like you said, either it's just it becomes a fad, like the grazing fad, and that's it, or even again, if we look at breakfast, okay, like breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Well, we found out in writing the 17-hour fast and researching it that is a marketing slogan.
Yeah, I was going to get into the marketing.
First came to be in a magazine that was funded by none other than John Harvey Kellogg, the Kellogg cereal company. And then, ironically, one of their main competitors, the Post cereal company, it was in the 40s and 50s that they got hold of this slogan and kind of almost trademarked it and put all this advertising, and they, you know, paid some doctors to be on ads like Dr. So-and-so says breakfast is the most important meal of the day. And
so it's smoking.
Yeah, exactly, right? Yeah, with I think at one point like 70% of the New York Yankees had cigarette endorsement deals, you know, that kind of deal.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, similar thing. And so it became just, I mean, how many people watching or listening to our interview today have heard the phrase, breakfast is the most important meal of the day?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that didn't just come from nowhere, but it came from a writer who was paid by John Harvey Kellogg to write an article in which that phrase appeared. Then it was co-opted by the Post cereal company, you know, 3 decades later, until it got to the point when an idea seeds in 51% of the population or more and becomes accepted. And then we get into what you said, throwing the baby out with the bathwater on fat. Oh, it causes heart disease. And then obviously the sugar conspiracy, you know, on the other side of it, or like, oh, the sugar companies are trying to put all the blame on fat. And then we get to so how many people, you know, again have heard...
I saw these like blowbacks, right?
Yes, exactly, that fat is bad, you know, and then we, of course, oh, well, butter is bad. Well, then what comes out of that? Margarine and all these artificial... and then you have the whole thing with trans fats.
And so they get banned.
So Andy would talk about the law of unintended consequences with all this, you know. And so really you can trace this evolution. And so now we're all convinced that we have to eat breakfast, that we have to eat at least every couple of hours, and, you know, supply and demand, right? Well, those things are obviously synced up. And so we get into these mindsets. And really, so what Frank goes back to is what do we believe about eating and our eating habits? What have we been led to believe, you know? And then everything comes out of mindset, behaviors, habits. And so what we're doing physically with going to the refrigerator or going to the pantry, that isn't just some isolated physical action, or, you know, the neuroelectrical system, you know, oh, this fire is here and that causes us little robot to go to the fridge and do this. No, it starts with mindset, and then it goes to behavior, then it goes to it hardens into habit. Right. And so the question is, can we honestly step back and examine our habit loops and start to understand how we can re-engineer those and go back down the chain from habit to behavior, new behavior, grooving new behaviors until those become habit, and change our whole mindset and our perspective and put food back in its rightful place in our lives, rather than it becoming either this dependence or almost, to some people, almost like a false god in their existence.
Yeah, it becomes an addiction in some ways, right? So,
yeah.
Holy shit, man. This is so awesome. I was just thinking about like neuroplasticity, right, in terms of, you know, sort of the upsides of it, but there's the downsides of neuroplasticity in regards to like bad habits. And what you guys are educating people on is like the whole concept of discernment, right? Because there's so much information out, and that ties in with fasting with information as well as nutrition, right? And so how we can become more aware of what's going on beyond like being controlled by certain forces like marketing and advertising and commercialization, part of like the survival instinct of working the 9 to 5. You come off of work, you hate your fucking job, you know, you're tired, you're just hungry, so hangry and horny, you know, you just start throwing stuff down the pipe. You're binge watching some of these amazing shows which are designed to be addictive. They're amazing shows, right? And so we're inundated with all this stuff, and there gets to a point where you feel like this sense of desperation, right? And so it seems like a lot of us have to get to that like cracking point. We have to get to this place where we're just saturated, oversaturated with all this stimuli, all this noise, and I guess maybe that's how we learn, you know, and we get to that place. And unfortunately, some people get to that place when they're on deathbed or they're about to be diagnosed with something that's horrible. And so what you guys are doing is essentially like saying like, hey, stop, hit the pause button, let's take a look at this, and then here are some ways to like sort of gain more control of your life, you know, and now be sort of the master of that domain. So what would be the downsides to like the 17-hour fast? Like is there any in terms of, you know, just it's just new. It's a new concept, or what do you think?
Well, I think for people that have never fasted and are always in a fed or overfed state, you know, it can feel physically unpleasant the first couple of times. Or again, we can set ourselves up psychologically to believe that. Think there's no way I can go without food for that. But here's the deal, and the reason that, you know, Frank says you should start this in the evening is to make it easier. Because guess what? If you're getting adequate sleep, you're going to be asleep for a decent percentage of this time.
That's
and so,
awesome.
you know, you have your dinner, and then, you know, with him, you know, and early risers, there seems to be in my co-authors a lot of early risers, and I'm not one of them. And partly that's just chronobiology, and then secondarily it's just, you know, reality of having 2 kids and multiple editors to answer to, and, you know, I just find I can write well at night. But
yeah, it's right, because it's real quiet too. Yeah,
but
that's your alone time.
But for someone like me, you know, there's obviously the option where I could start the fast later at night because I go to bed later and get up later. But bottom line is, if you're getting your 8 hours, maybe 9 if you're lucky, of sleep, then a decent percentage of this time you're going to be asleep. So really, one of the ways that Frank designed this was to make it that way, so that it does give you adherence right off the bat, and it doesn't make it
so
too
nature
unpleasant.
built in fasting through sleep.
Yes. Yeah, but if you go and eat a bunch of food right before bed, obviously now the bodybuilding community, as you say, well, be like, oh, well, that's great, you know, I need to get my cottage cheese in, or my, you know, my casein, or whatever it is. And sure, there might be validity if your only goal is to put on muscle mass, and there's obviously research to back up some of those things.
Right.
But as you said, nature would design us to, you know, go to bed when the sun sets and be asleep, and not be, you know, and to be in a fasted state when we're asleep. And so, yeah, I mean, it's it may feel a little bit unpleasant or you know, jittery to people at first, even though, you know, particularly when you get into the morning hours. But Frank doesn't want to set it up so that it's like, well, if you don't get to 17, that it's an abject failure. You know, like if you're just truly feeling like crap, and that isn't just a projection of your fears and doubts about it, well, okay, well, maybe you get to 13 or 14 hours and you decide, okay, I'm going to break my fast, but maybe do it in a good way. Like you said, have a handful of almonds, handful of nuts, you know, maybe have half an avocado or something like that. Break it in a good way. Don't go get a Snickers.
These are like guidelines.
Yeah,
they're
don't
not
go
laws.
get a Snickers. Yeah, they're not written in stone. Like Moses didn't come down from the mountain with these tablets, and the 11th one was, thou shalt not fast for 1 minute more or 1 minute less than 17 hours. And so, yeah, it's really just guidelines. And so, you know, well, if you get to 13 or 14 hours, well, guess what? You've gone most of the way. And as long as you're breaking your fast in an intentional manner, you know, with some good fats or something like that, rather than a candy bar or can of Coke or big glass of orange juice or something high sugar, well, okay, well then fine. And maybe the next time you try to go 20 or 30 minutes beyond that. And maybe you don't get to the 17. Maybe you find for you 14 or 15 just about right. It makes you feel a bit better. You feel a bit more resilient. You know, that one work meeting that your boss said would take an hour takes 4 hours and just descends into this long, horrendous thing. And you get to the end of it, and sure, you're ticked off that you've been sitting in a conference room for that long. But outside of that, like, oh, I'm not even really that hungry, you know?
Yeah, it's interesting because it goes into this invisible like leash that we have with our technology and our smartphone. So even if it's not like near us, we're thinking about like going to it, or thinking about food, or thinking about like this other thing that we got to do versus like truly being here, you know?
Yeah.
So that sort of leash is like sort of cut, that cord, you know, that invisible psychic energy of being tied to these other things that never allow us to like fully be here.
Yeah.
So that's probably another benefit of this.
Yeah,
right?
because it's just that fear of, oh crap, I haven't eaten for an hour and a half. If I don't get, you know, a protein bar in the next 5 minutes, I'm gonna freak out, you know.
Yeah, it's like that acronym,
crash.
like fear of missing out, FOMO.
Yeah.
So that's where like a lot of people are, and back to your book Unplugged, that's part of, you know, unplugging from all these things so that we can recalibrate to this place where we feel like totally connected.
Yeah, versus deadening ourselves. Like even, you know, I told this story in a couple of other podcasts where we were on this trail a little bit further along, and I'm with my wife and kids, and you know, it's like bikers, right? Or even I told you the story of yesterday where this biker came bombing down the trail. You know, my wife and I had said hi to the guy in the parking lot. It seemed like a nice guy, I'm sure he is, but he had his headphones in and wasn't paying attention. Maybe he just didn't know it was a mixed-use trail. It's not just a mountain bike trail. But he literally, he heard this skidding because we didn't have our headphones in. We were just walking together and having some couple time and just walking along and back across the stream, and you heard this skidding on the loose rocks behind us. And she was like, "Oh my goodness!" And kind of pulled me aside. And this guy, had his headphones in and almost crashed into us on his bike because even though I'm sure he was hopefully enjoying the trees, he wasn't listening to the birds. You can probably hear in the background here, and wasn't really paying attention for us, and almost couldn't stop and almost ran into the back of me. And I've had that when I've been out running, and by running I mean plodding. It's not the kind of running Brian McKenzie does by any means. It's plodding at best, but I'm a plodder, and I'm a proud plodder. So I was plodding along one day, and again a guy came by, and I've had this with both a runner and a biker on 2 separate occasions, where they almost ran into me because they're looking down at what I assume is their heart rate. They got their headphones in here, and even beyond the safety aspects, this time of year, the bears are out of hibernation. We had a bear get in our garage twice last year before we put on the metal sliders. And, and it's real, but even if there isn't a bear around and there isn't that danger element, it's kind of nice to start to attune yourself to the bubbling stream that's 50 feet that way below us right now, and the the rustling of the leaves of the wind, and you don't have to go super hippie to be able to appreciate these things. And so in the training community, I find, like, outside of maybe martial arts and kettlebell disciplines, even sometimes where I go speak at a conference and it's more of a group fitness thing, then the blaring music and the ton of people, that gives me the same level of panic as when I'm in rush hour in the middle of a city. Because for me, my physical practice is more of a kind of monastic thing, whether it's being out on the lake paddleboarding with my wife and kids, or it's kettlebell work, or it's flipping a tire in the backyard or whatever, and just that quiet. But yet, these gyms have created this experience, and Jamie Wheel and Stephen Kotler go into this a little bit in Stealing Fire, of why this, blaring music and the why behind it. And so there are some reasons that they do it to drive certain feelings or behaviors. But it's, again, so why are we trying to either deaden ourselves to experiences, or, in quotes, enrich them through artificial means, where you can't out baseline nature? Like, even with the hacking community, like trying to, you can elevate this. Like, our goal should be to try to return ourselves to natural baselines in all these different things. So with a 17-hour fast, to retrain the liver and pancreas and that system a little bit. What, to elevate it 78% because I'm taking all these exogenous ketones? No, just to get us back closer to the baseline. Right. With our physical practice, like with Mobility WOD, Kelly's thing isn't, to try to make you superhuman. No, it's to return you to be able to move like a functional human being. And the body's designed to last 110 years and do so with vitality. So here's something to do. Or Brian with the breath work, and state change. I mean, that's okay. You can upregulate or downregulate, but that's, again, to try to get you more in tune with your breath and how to use that as one of the mechanisms to control physical, cognitive, emotional state, to return you more to a natural baseline. Yeah, so we get this idea that if we take these 200 pills a day of these various kinds, or even these 3 different things, or this MCT oil, that it's going to make us into Superman or Batman or something like this superhuman being. Right. It's not that. Like, it shouldn't be about that. Well, it's all about, like, performance, right? Like, people are trying to, like, reach these high levels and high states and try to, be superhuman. There's a lot of this archetype in movies, right? Like, people are like, man, I want to be Iron Man. I want to be like Thor, so it's all built in the culture in some sense. And I think it's cool that you can optimize and get to the place where you can become your best self. Yeah. But ironically, that does happen when you get back to baseline, where you eliminate the noise, you get a sense of yourself and awareness, and then you can go out in the world with this sort of awareness and not get hijacked by sensory enhancement things that are designed to, like, keep us addicted, keep us engaged, and sell more shit, like, to the point, so that's interesting that these kind of things are, like, built into society, and and everything is instant, right? And so this is enabling us to become all addicts,
where the whole point of what you guys are doing is to basically unplug or disengage from these things, and then get to a place of baseline where you have like this sense of a center and calibration, and then from there you can like go out in the world with this, holding on to this awareness, like to anchor it, and then you're even more powerful to notice like BS, like bullshit, all the noise, all the chaos, and maneuver through it. Kind of like the whole point of like martial arts or these like disciplines, right, is to discover yourself and step out into the world with that sort of power, right? And that's where you become even like human. You're more human, and then people perceive that as being superhuman. They're just going about it in a weird way. They're going about it in a way that they think that they can override nature, you know, including their own nature, which we can. I mean, we've seen that with like Wim Hof, but he's essentially gone back to nature to be able to tap into these evolutionary powers that are already wired in.
Yeah, and if you look at like the growth of these tourism experiences with unplugged retreats, or I read something, I think it was in Outside Magazine or Red Bulletin or one of those, where it talked about the massive growth in people booking time at monasteries and convents to not just embrace, you know, maybe there's a fasting component of that, but just the discipline of silence and solitude. And as you mentioned, untethering, like check your phone in at the door kind of thing, and you're not getting it back. And so why is there this, you know, thing that's becoming, you know, tens of millions of dollars a year being spent on that kind of retreat? Because I think, as you mentioned earlier, people were realizing that despite this abundance, they're sicker than ever before, you know, they're more stressed than ever before, they're more unsatisfied than ever before, and all these things that they thought that they could fill this kind of eternal, this hole, this eternal longing within themselves, maybe they're starting to realize that, as you said, that is BS and that's a false promise. You know, food has become this thing that it was never intended to be. You know, like we, you know, talk about stress eating and that kind of thing, and then again, from that mindset and that behavior then becomes a habit, and now suddenly that becomes the norm. You know, and it starts to become this bigger thing than just the individual. But then we start to look at it on a societal level and look at some of those trends. And again, it's not to say that like, oh, all of this is bad and therefore we shouldn't, you know, just completely ditch it, never mess with it again. You know. But it's just these becoming more aware and learning from people that have, you know, got back closer to those baselines, and then starting to decide like really what is essential in your life. You know, going back to that Bruce Lee quote, and what are those few things that you've decided to try to master? What are those relationships that you've decided to prioritize? Because it's great to have, you know, 1,200 or 1,500 pseudo friends on Facebook, and if you're putting out positive stuff and you're not getting bogged down in viewing everything through the lens of divisive partisan politics, you know, and all that negativity that we see online, or you're not trolling people, well, you know, it's a great way to communicate, let people know what you're up to. You and I obviously connected through this, and so again, it's a neutral thing, that if you wield it well, that's fine. But when was the last time you sat down with a friend for an hour, hour and a half and had an in-depth conversation like this, where you weren't, you know, something was buzzing on your wrist, something in your pocket, you know, just taking you out of that experience? And as you said, just even the recognition that I may not be physically looking at it, that it's there, takes you out of that and diminishes those experiences. So what are those few disciplines that you have decided are essential? How are you going to decide to pursue them and prioritize them and master them? And sometimes even what are those just changes that may seem small, like swapping your Fitbit or your Apple Watch for a freaking analog watch or whatever it is, so that you're not, you know, giving into that FOMO all the time. And even if you look at the ads for those things, that's what it's based on. Never miss a message again. Like, okay, they're pushing the personalized coaching angle, but it's also never miss a text or email again. Like, really, you need another way for people to contact you 24/7, and you think that's going to add to your life in some way? You know, it was back in the day, unless you're a member of the military, or like Frank, you were on call for a hospital.
Right.
You know, and those people would have a pager. Who else was contactable 24 hours a day? And again, we haven't caught up in terms of adapting to these things, to this rapid pace of change, just like with what we were talking about with food delivery, storage, and preservation. We haven't given ourselves a chance to cause up. So what are some of the problems that's caused, and how can we just in small ways start to be more cognizant of that, and then make these changes which may seem small but may actually over time accumulate bigger benefits.
Man, this is amazing, dude. This is really cool because I think that's why I love having this show, is that I can engage and have these conversations. I think a lot of people are really yearning for these kind of things. I think that's why like podcasts are becoming so popular, right? Because there are some times when we're in traffic or we're driving, it's annoying to have to like wait that long to get somewhere because of overpopulation in certain areas. But the beauty of podcasts, or even like old school radio back in the days when they had like storytelling, where you had to use like imagination and just the power of voice, that's engaging to hear these conversations, to be able to use each other as a soundboard, because I think a lot of feedback mechanisms going on that we miss, that's lost through technology, through a screen, and what's interesting is that I really feel like that's where we're heading now, is that more and more people are having these kind of conversations, are disengaging from tech, which is, it's cool. I mean, it's entertaining. Again, it's like how you wield it. But I just think about like all the people like wanting to achieve fame, or wanting to be like noticed, or thinking that if they had a ton of followers or something.
I know, and it goes back to there's this great episode of Seinfeld where Kramer and Jerry are out for a walk one day, and Kramer sees this old talk show set in a dumpster and pulls it out, and the Merv Griffith show, and sets it up in his apartment. And he brings in Jim Fowler, the animal expert, kind of like Steve Irwin before the Crocodile Hunter, like 25, 30 years before. And to be a guest in this, in quotes, talk show. And Jim Fowler looks around and he says, "Where are the cameras?" And there aren't any. And that to me, like social media, like people going live all the time. And it's like, okay, I'm on social media as a box check, and because it allows me to set up interviews and to make connections with great people like yourself. And so there are benefits to it.
It's a broadcast.
Yeah, but a lot of the time, I think really are my 800 Instagram followers, like waiting with bated breath to see what am I going to do next. I mean, come on, that's just delusion. And so it goes back to the Kramer thing, with his talk show of where are all the cameras, And so at another point, someone's asking him something like that, and he says, like, no more questions, because it's uncomfortable to have to reckon with that reality of like this, kind of ego gone mad, ego run rampant, and this delusion of, captaining the good ship delusion. And, somewhat, I guess, iPod and iEverything may have created this and just kind of atomized certain parts of culture, with regard to music and other things. But then you just, you start to think, like, the narcissism element of it, sometimes I think, I should just not be on social media, partly because my co-authors have big followings, so in practical sense, maybe we don't need it. But then also, if I really honestly totaled up that time, where could I reinvest that? So I don't know.
Yeah, it's crazy because through Unplugged, I actually like stepped away from social media, right? For like 6 months. And the only reason I came back was that there were actually people that really were inspired by my life and how I'm able to do what I do, right? And so I was thinking, I was like, well, if I'm going to come back, it's for them, because I could care less about it. It was so liberating not to be attached to that anymore, But what was interesting is that towards that place where I started to come back, I was actually like sneaking on and like looking at like what everybody else was doing. So in a way, it was really cool in terms of a networking thing, or like keeping up with like what's going on in like the people that I'm close to in their lives, So like that was kind of the original intention, was like to keep in touch with your friends and family. But then all of a sudden it grew to this pseudo family, and it's like now you're like seeing some feed, right? And you're like, you're next thing you know, like 2 hours has gone by, and you're like, you're like seeing a feed of something, or you see something politics or something on YouTube or some viral video, and you go down these rabbit holes, and you're like, holy shit, where the hell did I go the last couple of hours? The same if you're mindlessly driving, right? You get to a place and you're like, how the hell did I get here, right? And it's pretty crazy, like how the brain works, and how once we get a hold of like understanding how it works, like how powerful we can become, but also how vulnerable we can become to these things, you know, if we're not aware of it.
Yeah, and again, it comes down to, you know, what we talk about in Unplugged a little bit. Like, if you're using it as a beneficial tool and you have a handle on that, and there are boundaries around it, then great, keep doing it, right? But if it's become a taskmaster that is constantly preying on your mind, I think in his book Irresistible, Adam Alter says the average American touches or looks at their phone every 6.5 minutes. That's addiction. Like, that's a problem. And so if it's at that level, and then you layer fitness technology on top of it, and you're checking your freaking steps and your heart rate and your whatever, your HRV, whatever it might be, all the time, as well as checking all your, you know, your iPad, your iPhone, your everything all the time, and it has a handle on you and it's become a domineering taskmaster, that's an issue that you might want to check yourself a little bit, you know, and at least run one of those monitoring apps that looks at how much time you actually spend, because chances are, like how people overestimate the number of hours that they spend sleeping, I'm going to guess myself and you and everyone else out there probably underestimates the amount of time that we spend engaged with technology. And then, as you said, if you're just surfing feeds for a couple hours, how much of that is beneficial versus, as you said, the chance to spread a positive message? And you know, like with any of the books, if we're able to move the needle in a positive direction for one person, then I think we've done our jobs. And the same with your podcast. If you're able to inspire one person to meaningful change, then I think you're doing a great job. And so, again, all of these things are neutral. It's just a question of what our intention is and what our application is, and are we doing that for the greater good?
Right. So this comes into like addiction, and so intervention for addictions, right? Because a lot of people think the answer is to go cold turkey, and I think that that's the case for some really extreme cases, but for most people to actually master this is to actually just be aware and know, like, first admit that you're addicted. Mm-hmm. Like, I can certainly admit in the past I was addicted to social media and like the smartphone. Mm-hmm. In some ways I still am, mm-hmm. but less. So I've been able to move the needle, which is cool, and people are understanding that even with like the 17-hour fast per se, is that, okay, like I may not have been able to hit 17, but I was able to hit like 12, mm-hmm. and then 13 like a week later, and then slowly built. So I think the answer for me with addiction is like exposure therapy, mm-hmm. is to be around it, to be in these areas or like environments that are addicting, but now you can actually say no.
Yeah, and again, it's partly, that's what we hope this book is not just like, okay, you need to put food back in its proper place. It's just a reset, you know, and being able to set up boundaries. And some, you know, there are some helpful apps for the tech stuff, like where it'll literally, after you've been online or on Instagram or Facebook for X amount of minutes a day, it will shut it down so you can't get into it unless you probably got rid of the app and were like, oh, I hate this, I'm not doing this anymore. But so there are some artificial ways to do it, but once you've maybe regrooved a new, more positive behavior with a boundary around it, then from there, how much, like with Andy's experiment in the lab with the runners, and you know, the rate of perceived exertion and managing to gauge their pace that way, then can you maybe start to peel away that app or that technology that's limiting it and setting the boundary, and start to just know, okay, that's enough for today, I'm going to push away from this for now and go play with my kids without looking at my phone. Oh, how was your day at school, son? And then you go back to looking at your phone. Like, that's not good.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because what you guys are doing is providing education that's not even provided in school too, right? Because like with anything that requires getting a license or a certification, that there's some training involved with like driving a car or buying a firearm, or in this case like buying a smartphone or a computer, you know, like how like that's where parents come in to be able to educate their kids, because you see kids are like fully addicted to these things, you know. It's like these are all technological like babysitters, you know, like or replacing parenting. It's like, I don't want to deal with this like crazy kid, so here, just watch this little movie on this tiny screen.
And then the rest of the time I'm going to have them in a million activities, and then I'm going to complain. And when you ask me, oh, so how's life? Oh, I'm just a glorified taxi driver for my kids. You know, they're in soccer, they're in volleyball, they're in this. So yeah, the combination of the iPad or the TV is the third parent, or the video game system. And then, you know, Chris Bell really goes into this, obviously, to the nth degree in Trophy Kids, You know, that kind of, you know, sports are good, but again, in their place. But if that's taking the place of you engaging with your kid and actually having this valuable two-way relationship, then again, you add that to the tech. Well, there may be 0 minutes a day you're actually in a real, authentic, engaged conversation with your child, and at least for me, that would be a problem. So.
Yeah, it's crazy because I think about a lot of the issues in society is because like parents aren't talking to their kids, and kids don't have a chance to talk to their parents, and maybe they're acting up because it's their cry to get attention, to finally be able to connect with their parents, to be vulnerable, to be able to sort of like say what they feel, you know. And a lot of people are like bottling these things up in some form or another. So like having a like conversation, communicating in the flesh, not through texting, which I've seen where people are texting each other from like across the room or on the same table, you know, and actually, you know, because all this social anxiety that comes with that, unless they're like these kids that are on a spectrum of like say autism, you know, which I think, you know, with exposure therapy that they can like adapt over time to becoming more and more what's considered like normal, whatever the fuck that means, you know. But so yeah, it's super important that people like actually have conversations again. We got about 5 minutes here, so I want to know about you, man. We talked about all this cool
no, we
stuff.
talked too much about me. You should tell me a story.
I just you know, traveling here, Hangry and Horny, it's just been like something that I really love to do. And you know, what do you want to know, brother?
I mean, what have you learned in Colorado the last few days? What's been kind of a light bulb moment for you?
Yeah, it's really interesting to see the contrast between like states like California and Colorado. What's interesting is like this was the first state to like legalize marijuana. So I don't know, like I can't tell if people are high or not. Like I don't even smell weed like I do in California. It like seem like everywhere I go in California or even like Vancouver, Canada, it's like, holy shit, man, there's just weed everywhere, you know? And ironically, I've not smelled marijuana at all.
That is,
you know?
Ironic.
The other second thing is I can't believe like how clean the air is. You know, like there is still traffic, but it's nowhere near like what we experience in like California. So that's been interesting. People actually make eye contact here and like say hi or wave. And I find in California, like people are so like caught up in their own lives or whatever the reason is, that if you walk by and say hi, like they're like reluctantly saying hi, or you know, they don't look at you, they just keep walking. So that's been interesting. And just hanging out with like you, Scott Carney, Dr. Dan Engel, being in you guys' world. It's been really cool. It's really cool to see like that you guys are living this lifestyle, and so am I. So that's been really fun. What else have I learned? I mean, like yesterday I was just gardening with Scott and his wife Laura. So like getting down in the dirt, how important that was, like to actually like do physical exercise, but stack it with something that actually has an outcome. Whereas like, you know, you go to the gym and you move weights around and yeah, your body looks great and you feel great, but did it contribute to like the world? Did it have like a sense of what I heard from Jamie Wheel and Stephen Collar? Does it grow corn? Does it have something that will be produced in life that will be of value to people? So we did this gardening, we planted the plant, got in on our hands and knees, used like tools. So we're using muscles that we probably don't use that often, right? And so the beneficial bacteria that was coming in, right? And like I had one of my best sleeps ever last night, right? And I think that has to do with this environment in Colorado. It's just like so powerful. It feels like home here. You know, I've traveled so many places, and the reason I like traveling is I love novelty. I love connecting with people. I love different environments. So it gives me that sense of aliveness, and like flow. And so being here, it just feels a lot lighter. like more vibrant, and you know, maybe the food, there's not as many options like as there are in California. Like California has like everything, but to me it seemed like probably the least happiest state, you know. And what I saw here is like this is the most fittest state in the nation, and like you see people outside their houses, right? Which is another thing that I picked up. We're in California, it's so densely populated, but you barely see people out of their houses in neighborhoods, you know, unless you're in a city. And so that's another interesting thing to notice. And I think there's a correlation when you're like walking and you actually see people saying hi to you first, so they're actually initiating, right? So yeah, it's been pretty fun, man. It's really cool to be here. Yeah, I'm always considering, because I'm just a nomad, right? I just, maybe that's ancestral, and but I've always tried to like find a place where I can put roots down, and then after 2 or 3 months I like gotta get back on the road. So but if I were to pick like a place to live, it'd certainly be here. And you know, I would love to have a place in like California, Hawaii, like New York. Like each place has like their amazing like upsides, you know. But there's always trade-offs with anything in life, you know. And with this podcast, with this type of equipment, it's easy to be able to be mobile, and that's where the smartphone comes in, or going to coffee shops and having Wi-Fi. It may not be the best Wi-Fi, but at least I can make it happen, you know. And so I think the thing for me is just like never quit, you know. Anytime you quit in life, like you're guaranteed that you're not gonna reach your dream, you know. And so like that's the other thing, is like how well can you bounce back from, you know, reaching these like high creative manic states like flow, you know, and then like the back end, like having a hangover, you know, and learning how to like manage your states. And so all these things we're talking about with all these amazing like leaders and authors, and they're putting out information. It's like, yeah, we're human too. Like we fuck up, but we keep going, you know. We just dust ourselves off, pick ourselves up by our bootstraps, keep going, don't quit, you know. And so and I've certainly done that in the past. So that's the beauty of like living life, is you're learning from your own experience, your own experiments, and just to keep moving forward. So like it's inspiring that you're like so prolific with writing books, you know. I've written a book in the past, and I got into a state where I don't remember like how I wrote that thing, you know. So but it was because every day I just like I did a little bit, and I just like moved the needle. And I think that that would be what you would say, is that every day you're just consistent.
Some days it's a lot, some days it's not.
Yeah.
But just keep doing it, and suddenly
the
manuscript comes out the other end. Yeah.
Awesome, man. Any final words before we like close up?
No, I mean, I really just appreciate the time and you coming up and us hanging and being able to do first interview that I've done truly unplugged outdoors, and you being open to that. And so I mean, I would just say really it just again, the uniting thread between Kelly Starrett, Dr. Frank Merritt, Fergus Conley, Andy Galpin, Chris Frankel, Brian McKenzie, all these great co-authors and collaborators that have taught me so much and continue to, is just a passion for helping people. And so again, just having the blessing to learn from them and to be able to serve by taking ideas out of their heads and put them onto the page to hopefully help some people is really just my continuing goal. And really to tell stories that hopefully change lives and improve lives is going to continue to be my goal. And so hopefully that resonates with people, and it's able to help bring some meaningful change. And that's, if we're doing that, then then I'd be okay. 50 years from now, I could look back on and say, regardless of how many books sold or however many views or clicks or however they manage the validity of blog posts these days, that it was worth it if it impacted a few lives in a positive way. So thanks for the opportunity to be able to say that and for our conversation today.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Phil. How can people find you?
Now the irony, right? So most of the social networks, it's just / Phil White Books, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, that kind of thing. And so that is ironic given what we're talking about, but again, trying to use it for good. And so and then just if anyone wants to reach out directly, I'd love to have a conversation, and just fill in a contact form on my website, philwhitebooks.com, which I don't update very often, but I do get those messages. And so we'd love to have a conversation with anyone, and that's partly what it's about, in just being open to conversation, and sometimes differing opinions through that, and then realizing, heaven forbid, that you actually know far less than you thought you did, and maybe you need to change your thoughts on some stuff. So go ahead, reach out, Phil White Books, and that would be great to talk to anyone and everyone about whatever.
Yeah, and it's cool because the irony too is that, like, even though we may have difference in opinions, that we actually have a lot in common, with each other. So Phil White, thanks for coming on.
Hangry and Horny,
brother.
Much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, my man.